Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. Just checking that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear.
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
hear you, Dorcas. Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Okay,
you.
super, great.
A very good morning and good afternoon or good evening to everybody where you are. First of all, please allow us to start by apologizing for calling for this meeting on the holiday of Yom Kippur and for calling the meeting at a time that's not suitable for everybody given the time zones. We're very delighted to see so many of you join us this morning. Before I pass over to the Director of the Supply Division and the Assistant Director of PAHO, I would like to just quickly run through a few comments and housekeeping on how the session will be run. So firstly, to say that we kindly request you to have your mic muted when you're not speaking. We encourage you to use the chat function and to share your comments and questions. We will collect all the comments and try to answer them during the discussion and Q&A section. And for those that we are not able to get to during the session, we'll make sure that we get back to you with those. You're also welcome to use the raise your hand functionality to be given the opportunity to speak during the Q&A session. And just so you all know, this meeting is being recorded. With that, I will pass over to Director of Supply Division.
Thank you so much, Dorcas, and hi everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many people that has signed up. As I see now, 132 or 133. So we really look forward to others joining this session as well. So very delighted to have you all here, and together with Dr. Jebras will be having few words on welcoming words to all of you. Let me start by saying that it has been now 10 months into this crisis, which actually has affected all of us, including you that are online, but also this pandemic, as we know, has had full direct and indirect impact on the societies where we live, the societies we work for, the children we work for. We've seen the mortality and mobility and health systems really being stretched. And the situation is still evolving, as also is the broader socioeconomic implications. So we have seen the societies really close down. We have seen schools closing. We also seen more than 100 immunization campaigns being postponed. This has had a major impact on access to children, being this access to health system or access to education, the social protection. So you can imagine how important this engagement is for UNICEF in the overall COVID response, and specifically when it comes to making sure that we are supporting this historical moment, the unprecedented moment that really has going to have absolutely a mark in our let's say engagement history in these markets. We are together here with PAHO, and would like to really thank all of you for supporting us, and also together with other partners as well, Gavi and so on, but supporting and really recognizing the efforts from the industry, from the governments in really trying to bring the science to the highest level, but also trying to respond to this crisis. We would like to really build back better. And we want to do this together with all of you, with partners, with industry, with the societies, with communities. So we're talking today in this meeting, and the focus is about the vaccine. But let's not forget that the COVID also is broader. To address the COVID response and to really reduce the mortality and flatten the curve is beyond also vaccine. And that's why I think the global community came together and they brought this solution, what we call otherwise the accelerated the access to COVID tools accelerator, where vaccine is one. But we are, as UNICEF, engaged also on diagnostics and therapeutics as well. And we're trying to support, work with private sector and support the government to make sure that not only we support the fast track development that the industry is making, which is really fantastic and unprecedented, but also to ensure that we have everything in place to make sure that there is an equitable distribution of the COVID-19 being diagnostic therapeutics and vaccines, which we're talking today. So I'm really pleased to see again so many of you in this pre-tender meeting today. We really need your full engagement. There are many answers that we don't know. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions coming through this discussion today. And that's the purpose of it. We would like to hear from you. We would like to learn from you, but also would like to provide you some clarity on the way forward and how we are going to address this jointly. We don't know, as I said, there are many unknowns, also starting from the time and availability of vaccines. Not to speak about, the issues that relates to, type of platforms, the quality, the safety data, and the issues related to licensing and so on. But the time is really pressing on us, and there is not enough time for us to wait until all of these have been sorted out. So we wanted to initiate this pre-tender discussion with you so that we prepare the grounds and we are ready for the vaccine when it's really licensed and is meeting the WHO target product profile, that we can make that available to countries in an equitable way. So a lot of discussion today that the team has been putting together is going to focus on presentation of the procurement strategy, and then we would like to hear some discussion, to hear questions from you. But also our colleagues from Gavi will talk us through the COVAX participation agreement and overall how we're going to approach this. This is not the end, this is the starting point of our engagement with you. And there will be, I'm sure there will be a lot of engagements again related to the tender moving forward. So I really hope that we will bring, at least today, some clarity on how we are going to work jointly and issue this joint bid or tender together with PAHO, and how we are going to support the Office of COVAX, which is led by Gavi, on ensuring that the advanced purchase agreements are also translated into long-term supply arrangements, then could finally result into doses that are going to be delivered to the countries. I know you probably have started already having questions on your head, and we are very excited also to start the discussion and hear from you. But let me call this meeting open, and I would like to hand over this meeting to Dr. Jabras for a few remarks, and to to emphasize that the meeting is on behalf of UNICEF, Gavi, and PAHO, and I don't know, on behalf of Aurelia as well. As you might have heard, she is now announced as the Managing Director of the Office of COVAX. And really, with that, I hand over to Dr. Jarbas to talk to us on behalf of PAHO. Thank you.
So, thank you. Good morning from here. First, I want to thank all the participants. This is, for our perspective, from our perspective, is a very important meeting that you have, and I would like to thank both UNICEF and Gavi that this has been a very constructive and positive partnership that we are building, and in this meeting, I think that will be also very important. I don't know if everybody knows about the PAHO. Indeed, PAHO is at the same time the Pan American Health Organization. We are the regional office of WHO for the Americas, and an independent organization to the Organization of American States system. As part of our technical cooperation to our member states, PAHO has a revolving fund for access to vaccines that supports 42 member states, countries, and territories in the Americas, purchasing vaccines, syringe, and supporting them to achieve immunization coverages in all the countries and the territories in the region. This revolving fund was launched by the member states in 1979. So now we have a little bit more than 40 years of experience purchasing vaccines and providing technical cooperation to them. Since the inception of the revolving fund,
早上太忙了，我在电话会上呢。
the idea.
对对对。
Mr. Vining, you're not on mute. Thank you.
Yes. But I think that since the beginning, the idea was to strengthen solidarity and to understand that the immunization is maybe one of the most important tools that you have in public health. Now we are facing this totally unprecedented challenge, the COVID-19 pandemic, that it triggered a global crisis with triple dimensions: health, economic, and social. The pandemic has put considerable economic burden for all countries around the world. And I think that they are dealing not only with the health crisis, but also with these other dimensions. The COVID-19 is also affecting many other public health priorities programs, such as mentioned by my colleague from UNICEF, Edna. Many countries in our region also had to postpone campaigns. Some immunization services were disrupted during the periods of lockdown in many countries. We are also very concerned about how to guarantee equitable access to a vaccine when the vaccine or the vaccines are available. When we look to the experience that we had with the flu H1N1 pandemic in 2009, 2010, the poorest countries in Latin America and the Caribbean got access to the vaccine 6 to 8 months after the developed countries had that access. So this is I think that a very important lesson that we learn, and that now this joint effort is trying to guarantee that every country will have the right to protect their population. We are also concerned, of course, about the cost of the vaccine in this context of a social and economic crisis, besides the sanitary, the health crisis. Countries will have to make a tremendous effort to guarantee that they can pay an affordable price to vaccine. We noted that it's very important. So this kind of dialogue, the collaboration. We also recognize that this is a totally unprecedented effort to develop a vaccine, but at the same time, we need to ensure that the same amount of energy will be put to guarantee that the countries will have access to this vaccine. So we are working very closely with the UNICEF and its supply division to elaborate our procurement strategy and approach for 2021. Today, in partnership with UNICEF and Gavi, we are presenting our joint approach on the strategy. And as many of your colleagues have said, we are building this plane as we fly it. So PAHO is committed to continue to work closely with UNICEF to align our strategy. Today, we are starting our 58th Directing Council with all the member states, all countries and territories Today we have our face open, so I apologize in advance if I will not be able to stay for the entire consultation. But my colleague, John Fitzsimmons, that is the chief of the revolving fund, will stay with you to answer any question if I'm not here for the last 30 minutes of the consultation. Thank you again, and I hope that we will have a very productive and open discussion in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Jervas, and thank you for joining us. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you to Dr. Diabas for these opening remarks, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of those online, and thank you so much for joining us for this pre-tender consultation on the COVID-19 vaccines for delivery in 2021. So let's see if I'm able to actually move the slides forward. Yes, so the agenda you will see here is the presentation of procurement strategy, which I'll embark on in a few seconds. Then we will have discussions and questions and answers moderated by UNICEF and PAHO. There will be a presentation from Gavi on the COVAX participation agreement and closing remarks. So over the next 25 minutes, we will walk you through those agenda points that you see here. This is the outline of the presentation. Initially talk about the procurement strategy, the context of the strategy that was already touched upon in the opening remarks, the anticipated demand, which we do appreciate will be in flux and be further confirmed over time, special terms that will potentially apply to this unique and innovative procurement activity, product qualification and procurement process and milestones, including timelines, which we know that you're all looking forward to hear more about. So first of all, the objectives of the procurement strategy is to support the COVAX facility to achieve the overall goals of this undertaking. The overall objective, as you have heard also in other consultations with Gavi and AMC and COVAX facility, is to accelerate access to sufficient volumes in 2021 of the COVID-19 vaccines, of assured quality for the COVAX participating economies by providing a pool bid. And the pool bid will secure information that is critical for many different aspects. So first of all, the responses and the bids that industry will be providing in response to the tender that will be issued. The Gavi, the COVAX Facility Secretariat, can establish the pull contracts. And you've already seen in the public domain that at least one of these agreements, advanced purchase agreements, have been established by Gavi. And these agreements will also leverage the expertise from UNICEF and PAHO. But secondly, also UNICEF and PAHO will be establishing supply agreements for procurement and delivery following issuance of international tenders. And that's where we are now with this tender that we are about to launch in the next couple of weeks. UNICEF also, as a COVAX procurement coordinator, as you will have seen in the press releases as well, can establish key basic terms that COVAX self-financing and self-procuring economies can reference, which will facilitate also from an industry perspective the engagement with countries beyond those procuring through UNICEF and PAHO. So there's specific objectives as well that we aim to achieve. And first of all, to expedite the access to the COVID-19 vaccines by building on the push and pull contracts that have already been established and have been announced in the public domain by CEPI, Gavi, but also the Gates Foundation is active in this scope of work for the participating economies. And the purpose and intent is to incentivize manufacturers to develop vaccines and also develop production capacity and begin manufacture before the clinical results are available and licensure has been achieved, which is something unique and unprecedented at the scale that we are looking at here. The volumes that we're targeting for the COVID-19 tools, or the ACT accelerator, is to deliver 2 billion doses by the end of 2021. Taking a vaccine to that level of scale in 15 months is unique, and it's unprecedented, and will be a challenge for us all to get to that level of supply. Drawing on the financing and de-risking provided by the push and pull contracts and the globally pooled volumes, which are, again, as I mentioned, unprecedented from a volume perspective, COVAX is aiming to achieve the lowest prices on the market. We'll also aim to secure a balanced portfolio. The more diverse portfolio of vaccines, the bigger is the probability that there will be a number of vaccines. Hopefully, they will be able to achieve the epidemiologic outcomes, providing protection over time, interrupt the outbreak, and also potentially getting into a more routine schedule if that would be needed in the future. So it's important to mitigate risks, including dependency on a particular vaccine platform, with each platform potentially having different features with regards to the ability to scale up production at rapid pace, but also having new technologies that have not been documented at large scale before in the market. Also looking at exporting regulatory authorities for a risk diversion perspective, and ensuring that advanced purchase agreements and LTAs will aim to result in a balanced and geographically diverse portfolio to reduce any risks. So as we already talked about, the world is in an unprecedented pandemic situation. There's extraordinary efforts to discover, develop, and bring a COVID-19 vaccine to the market. And this is the first time that the vaccine is being procured, but obviously also the discovery and development is still requiring additional resources and investment to bring the vaccine to the market. The vaccine will be used as soon as it becomes available, preferably in 2020, but more realistically is 2021, with the ambition to reduce deaths, and including also to ensure that we have a functional health system that's able to take care of those affected by disease. There will be all novel approaches that will be required to taken into use in order to ensure that we have the successful outcomes, and we will have new approaches and tactics, but they will build on known practices and aim to help achieve the procurement objectives within the COVAX partnership role. The strategy also needs to cater for the uncertainties and unknowns surrounding product development, as we already heard Eva talk about. We don't know when we will have a vaccine, but there's also at-risk production and investments going on while we aim to secure the vaccines at a short delay as possible. We've also heard through the expression of industry that industry indicates that they're willing to collectively produce unprecedented quantities of vaccines over the next couple of years, but they need signals that investments to support such large-scale production of doses would actually be required, and that there would be some certainty that there would also be a risk sharing and risk covering of the investments as well. So this is tying both the procurement pieces and the advanced purchase commitments together. So we talked about the novel approaches and tactics. It's clear, as Eva was also talking about, that the procurement process can't be allowed to delay access, and therefore, while we did the advanced market commitment of the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, we did enter into agreement with manufacturers before they had their vaccines pre-qualified, but it was at the stage when the vaccines had been submitted and accepted by review for the WHO pre-qualification team. Here we're trying to establish contracts at an earlier stage, even than the time when the products have been submitted for review and accepted for review by WHO, as vaccines are very much in the development phases, and there are, as we discussed, uncertainties and unknowns surrounding product development and at-risk investments, and we aim to secure the full volumes by the end of 2021 at the latest, but as soon as possible. So to achieve that outcome, we are issuing a joint tender, as was also mentioned by Dr. Jabas, to issue a joint tender with UNICEF and PAHO. We have had close collaboration over many years, including on products in limited supply, but this is the first joint tender of its nature. So this is all very exciting, obviously. Bids that will be coming in from manufacturers will be used as a basis for Gavi to establish pull contracts, the advance purchase agreements that we mentioned before. They will also be used for UNICEF and PAHO to establish supply arrangements, time-bound LTAs and not volume-bound at this point in time, to facilitate purchase orders and deliveries once the COVAX allocations that will be coming out of WHO of a quality assured product have been made, as these products also meet the regulatory requirements. And the Procurement Coordinator will establish key basic terms for self-procuring, self-financing economies to reference when they are procuring their COVAX allocated products, again, to avoid that manufacturers will need to operate with 50 or 60 individual buyers, which will be impossible in a short period of time due to the workload and other competing priorities. So just a few clarification point on the role as the procurement coordinator and the key responsibilities. So first of all, the role will be to monitor supply and demand based on allocation decisions and prioritization, and in line with the terms of the advance purchase commitment. So early information on supply availability and how this can be distributed among prioritized economies is a critical function. But also the monitor and the usage and the drawdown of the advance purchase agreements to ensure that these are obligations and commitments are met to the extent at all possible. And this also requires manufacturers to report into the to the procurement facility for all procurement and deliveries under this mechanism, including for self-procuring, self-financing countries. And then the role is to provide support to and align between the COVAX procurers on terms and conditions and supporting consistency towards manufacturers, again, to facilitate and ease operations in this unique situation that we're in. So looking at the anticipated demand, as you will have heard, the COVAX facility is basing the 2 billion target for delivered vaccines to countries in 2021. Which may require up to 4 billion doses to be procured, assuming a success rate of 50% of the projects that is currently ongoing and yet to reach critical milestones regarding safety and efficacy. And the allocation of doses will be based on the WHO allocation framework. And you will have seen this also in the publication that WHO has made on the fair allocation mechanism for the vaccines. So initially, there will be an allocation of 3% for populations for COVAX participating economies. And once all economies have received 3% for their critical health staff in the population, which is assumed to be around 3%, then as a second tier, up to the 20%, an additional 17% of doses will be allocated to the countries and participating economies. And it is necessary to have the facility and the allocation framework in this context, as it's anticipated that there will be a shortage of supply throughout 2021, but also to ensure that the highest risks are being considered first in the global context of a global pandemic. So after the allocation of the first 20%, there will be additional access to supply available under the COVAX facility, up to 30 additional percent, up to 50% for the self-financing countries. And this may also apply to the AMC countries who decide to self-finance requirements above the 20 doses, which they will be granted under the current mechanism. So this unique mechanism will require some special terms, and while many of the terms and conditions for tendering will be the same as UNICEF and PAHO normally applies for vaccine tendering and procurement, there will be a number of several special terms and conditions for this joint vaccine tender because of the unprecedented situation as well as the global pandemic that is currently ongoing. So first of all, there will be a phasing of bids and awards, and we'll get more into that moving into the next couple of slides. But the role, just to put the role of the advanced purchase agreements in context to the procurement, then these will form the frame for the procurement and delivery under the LTAs if and when the candidate vaccine meets a WHO target profile, which is in the public domain and was developed through a consultative process, as this is confirmed by the COVAX independent product group, and it receives licensure by a stringent regulatory authority or a WHO listed authority, and or it receives pre-qualification, all of this to be confirmed by WHO. And the ambition is to enter into time-bound LTAs rather than volume-bounds, which we often apply in UNICEF, taking into consideration the number of unknowns at the time of the procurement. It should also be understood that any volume guarantees will be provided via the advance purchase agreement and not via the supply agreement. So to have a clear understanding of this, and this will obviously be expressed and clarified further in the request for proposal that will be issued over the next couple of weeks. You may also have heard about the need for a humanitarian buffer, and there have been discussions of a humanitarian buffer or stockpile or set aside, and the mechanism seeks to ensure equitable supply capacity for humanitarian situations, deployments, or other emergency related situation. And it's the target to have 5% of doses allocated to be made available to implementing partners, including humanitarian organizations. From a pricing expectation, as I already mentioned, manufacturers are encouraged to provide a flat lowest price during the pandemic phase for all COVAX economies. And this is, of course, a reflection of the investments that have already taken place in manufacturers, including from the CEPI, from Gavi, but also from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that have provided push funding for vaccine manufacturers. There will be a need for different pricing Incoterms to be offered in the tender, and you can see them here. As some of you know, UNICEF usually operates with the free carrier on board, since we have agreements with the global freight forwarders that are helping us distributing more than 2 billion vaccine doses on an annual basis under our agreements with freight forwarders. PAHO, as you may also be aware, is requiring delivery to place of destination, which is a DPU. And then there's other Incoterm, cost, insurance, and freight that may also be requested to be quoted. There is a considerable scope of work that has been going on for some months on the indemnification and injury compensation, and this will be non-standard for the AMC 92 economies. The final details are still being worked out as we speak, but hopefully they will be available by the end of this week to ensure that they can be incorporated into the RFP document so that manufacturers are fully aware of what are the expectations. It's clear that that as this is a novel vaccine, it may be a challenge to ensure standard insurance for vaccine manufacturers for their licensed products, as would be the standard requirement, as we would always expect from manufacturers that they assume full risks of their products, and therefore the efforts are going into how can we secure for the AMC 92 countries which do not have strong systems in place, that there is equal access to indemnification for in case of any serious unexpected adverse events following the use of the vaccine. So as I said, more to come on this aspect. On licensing and documentation, there will be a strong effort on convergence and reliance on mutual processes for products to be accepted, to avoid that manufacturers will have to license their products in a number of countries in a very short period of time, and also to avoid that there is further delays because of any such regulatory requirements. However, there may still be countries that require licensure or emergency provisions that will require a review of documentation. So such documents required for licensure and facilitating and support regulatory requirements to have a review of the files will need to, those documents will need to be readily available from manufacturers. I think we already talked about the vaccines that will have to be pre-qualified by WHO or as designated by WHO through a stringent regulatory authority or WHO listed authority. Exceptionally, there could be an acceptance of products under the emergency use listing from WHO, but this would require that countries are accepting to take delivery of such vaccines, and this is not a given and a guarantee, and there will be special requirements also for countries taking delivery of vaccines under emergency use listing. Adverse events following immunization will be critical to follow up and assess and review, and this will be a follow-up as part of the WHO guidance and review with the COVAX facility and WHO to ensure that there is the establishment of a solid safety database on each of the different products to move forward with the expanded use and at scale use in many countries and in large volumes over a short period of time. As standard, UNICEF will publish contracts on our website, and PAHO will apply a standard process as well, and Gavi will also follow their standard processes for making public announcements on APAs. Key basic terms available for other COVAX self-financing and self-procuring countries will be included in the tender document as annexes for PAHO and UNICEF, but there will be other terms and conditions that manufacturers will be asked to agree on in order to facilitate the procurement, including prices based on standard documentation and Incoterms to those self-procuring, self-financing countries that will also need to be supplied under these agreements. We mentioned the humanitarian buffer, and it is important to understand that the buyers for that humanitarian buffer may be other buyers, for example, NGOs following the WHO allocation of volumes for that segment, and this will also be coordinated by UNICEF as a procurement coordinator. So we talked about the reporting to the COVAX procurement facility, and the manufacturers will need to provide information on timely updates of production progress and supply availability, as well as actual deliveries in doses to all COVAX buyers, irrespective of this goes through UNICEF, PAHO, or a self-procuring, self-financing country. Regarding the product qualification, so to be eligible for an advanced purchase agreement and a supply agreement, as a very first step, the candidate vaccine that is in clinical development or in preclinical development, but with availability for supply in 2021, must meet the WHO target product profile for these vaccines. And you see the link here, and I'm sure you're already familiar with what are the requirements, the preferred and the critical or minimal requirements. In order for a vaccine to be procured and delivered to a country, it must have received licensure by a stringent regulatory authority or pre-qualification, and we will be relying on WHO for this determination. So what you see here is the target product profile, and this is also available on the link that you see here. There is a roadmap of the strategic goal that to develop and license vaccine for reactive use in outbreak settings and or with a long-term protection for administration to those at high ongoing risks of COVID-19. And the vaccine characteristics that are provided in the target profile are listed here. And as mentioned, there is also indicated values for the preferred characteristics and the critical minimal characteristics. So this information is available on the website here below. I talked about the independent product group before, and there will be a number of advisory groups that will have access to the information that you will be submitting in the bids to UNICEF and PAHO. One of these groups is the independent product group with the role to provide technical guidance to the facility on prioritization and inclusion of suitable vaccines for the advanced purchase agreement, and an overview of the status of the COVAX portfolio of vaccine candidates based on information related to the clinical development, the manufacturing, and the supply. The procurement reference group, which you are familiar with from other UNICEF tenders and procurement activities, will also provide independent advice to the facility on its procurement strategy and key business terms as proposed of proposed the APAs, leveraging also the expertise that UNICEF and PAHO can bring to the table from working with the industry as an everyday undertaking. And based on recommendations from the PRG, the office of the COVAX facility will discuss APAs with manufacturers. So it's obviously important that the bids are full and fully meeting the requirements of technical information in order for these assessments to be undertaken. So we will share information in confidence with these advisory groups. And as most of you are also familiar with UNICEF with technical support from the WHO's pre-qualification team, and PAHO with their technical team will undertake a due diligence and assessment and review of the offers with the purpose and intent to enter into supply agreements. And we will, as always, follow up on any information that is not clear or that is missing in order for us to do a full assessment of the offers. So we're now going into the procurement process and the specific milestones. And as always, one of the purposes of having a pre-tender consultation is to ensure that we do have feedback from the vaccine industry on different aspects of the strategy, including the timelines that we're proposing to assess whether these are feasible and realistic from industry's perspective. So the supply arrangements will aim to provide vaccines throughout 2021. Should vaccines be available in 2020, we will have the agreements in place in order to also take delivery early. And we will include an option to extend to 2022 in case there are delays overall in the access to the vaccines, and should there still be a requirement for that. And the procurement process and milestones are all set up in order to meet those timelines. So what you see here is what we envisage will happen towards the end of this year. We are expecting to issue a tender over the next few weeks, and this is a tentative date on the 5th of October. There may be critical pieces of information in order for us to finalize the tender document, so it's realistic or probable that this will happen only the week after. But then Over the coming months, we will, on an ongoing basis, receive bids, and we will be making awards. And there will be phased evaluation, including by the WHO technical evaluation, but also the independent product group and the procurement reference groups to guide the establishment of the advanced purchase agreements that will be issued by Gavi, the COVAX office of the COVAX facility. And we expect that first batch of procurement awards will be possible by the end of October, again, of course, dependent on when we will be issuing the tender. And then we will have rolling awards coming in, also based on the finalization of APAs. It's the ambition that by the end of December, we will have key basic terms for self-procuring, self-financing economies agreed on as well to guide countries and industry. So just to be a bit more splitted about the phased receipt of bids and awards, as this is a new feature and a new process, but it's put in place in order to maximize the number of bids that we will be receiving, and also being mindful that some manufacturers are already well advanced in the processes and have already entered into other agreements outside of the COVAX facility and in addition bilaterally with government. So we expect that they will have a good understanding of the terms and conditions and the prices and the cost structure. And therefore, we are aiming to also smoothen out the workload a bit and providing more time for some manufacturers that are further away from having a good understanding. So therefore, we'll operate with 3 phases. So the phase 1 will be the manufacturers, which already have advanced purchase agreements with Gavi, and they will be asked to also submit offers first. And we are suggesting and anticipating a 2 weeks of response time from the time that the tender is issued. For the second phase, we envisage a closing date or a date for submissions 2 weeks later. So, and this will be targeting for manufacturers that are expecting to have vaccines ready by the first half of 2021. So they would need to submit their bids by the phase 2 deadline a couple of weeks after the closing of the first window. So that would allow 4 weeks of response time. And then for the third phase, another 2 weeks later, so 6 weeks from issuance of the tender. So we hope that that will meet the requirements of the industry. And we normally, for those who don't know, we normally close a tender, and bids submitted after a given date will not be considered because it would be considered to be unequal competition and lack of transparency. But in this case, and the early stages of the vaccine development, we don't envisage that we will be closing at any point until there is sufficient bids and award made to meet the full requirements. But this is still under discussion. So we'll also just quickly provide a few pieces of information on how a manufacturer becomes a supplier to UNICEF. So, and we know that PAHO may have similar requirements, and we'll welcome also John to just speak to those after this these few slides here as well. So first of all, there's an ethical screening as UNICEF enforces a strict zero tolerance policy concerning unethical or fraudulent aspects of suppliers, and accordingly any UNICEF supplier suspended or involved or suspected of involvement in proscribed practices may be suspended or forbidden from continuing business relations with UNICEF. And there's more information that can be found on our website under our procurement policies. There's a financial evaluation that will be requested from manufacturers, that they submit a complete copy of the most recent audited financial statements with comparative figures for the previous years. And UNICEF will then evaluate financial viability, ethical and legal issues to identify and mitigate fiduciary risks. So there's also more information that will be included in the tender document. Last, and this is my last slide, I just want to make an announcement that UNICEF and the World Bank Global Steering Group on Quality Assurance would like to invite participant in this call, and in particular, I would say subject matter experts in your organization on serialization and traceability to participate in a call tomorrow, and there should have been invites sent out also directly to companies on this call tomorrow to discuss further the ability to apply traceability measures on the COVID-19 vaccine. So with that, we'll open the floor for discussions, and thank you, and questions. Thank you.
Thank you
Back
very
to you,
much,
Dorcas.
Anne. Thank you very much, Anne. Perhaps we'll start with the two questions that are in the chat. And the first one is, what would be the process and timelines for the vaccines that will be ready by the second half of 2021? So Anne or colleagues at PAHO.
So for vaccines that would be expected to be licensed, if I understand the question correctly, and available for supply in the second half of 2021, we would expect bidders also to submit a proposal in response to the tender that we will be issuing over the next couple of weeks, and submit a proposal as soon as possible, but preferably within the 6 weeks lead time from the tender issuance. If they're able and ready to submit an offer earlier, they're welcome to do that. We may not have the capacity to get around to assess that. So we will focus initially on those vaccines that will be available first to ensure that the agreements are ready and signed as supplies become available. So I hope I responded to the question. John, I don't know if you want to add anything. Dorcas, any clarifications?
None from my side for now. Maybe John, before we take the next question.
No, for the moment, that's fine. Over.
Thank you. The next question is it anticipated that there will be separate supply agreements with UNICEF and PAHO, or single supply agreement covering all UNICEF and PAHO countries?
So John Fitzsimmons here at PAHO, just to kick in very quickly on this one. And so we expect to have long-term arrangements separate but aligned with UNICEF. Our LTAs would be linked to our PAHO terms and conditions. Over.
Thank you, John. The next question is related to licensure. And the question is, does it mean if the licensure is not issued by the stringent authority, the bid will be impossible, that it will be impossible to be in the first batch of procurement award? And do you want to take that?
Yeah, so the question was if the vaccine is not licensed by a stringent regulatory authority, yes, whether the vaccine would not be assessed as part of the first batch. I think, and I'm welcoming anybody, including Gavi, who's also on this call, to chip in, but my expectation would be that since we are not able to procure a vaccine until it's been licensed by a stringent regulatory authority or it has been pre-qualified by WHO, unless we have capacity, we would not assess that offer in the first batch, I think. But I'm also looking to Gavi to weigh in. We will. It will be necessary to look at resources, but there is also the option, as was mentioned, that if a product has emergency use listing by WHO, then we may still be able to procure it. This will be dependent, obviously, on countries in receiving the vaccine to accept that, because that basically means that a vaccine is not licensed in a country with a stringent regulatory authority, and it's not pre-qualified by WHO, but WHO will have assessed and assessed the file and the clinical data. But there may also be additional post-marketing or additional requirements for how that vaccine is used in the field. So don't know if someone else wants to chip in. Thank you.
If no one is chipping in, staying with the licensure question, another question is that if a vaccine is licensed by a stringent authority and meets criteria of the TPP, and the independent group proves to be ineffective or unsafe and is withdrawn from use, what are the financial implications under the LTA for the company? And also with that, still on the same area, is does FDA emergency use authorization qualify as an SRA approval?
I think these are very relevant questions, and I don't think that I can respond to the one whether the FDA emergency use qualifies as a stringent regulatory authority. So I think that's something that needs to be explored further, unless someone else on the call from Gavi or others are able to respond to that. So if the product is being withdrawn from the market because of safety issues, how would that stand in the LTA? I think the issue would be related to the advanced purchase agreements primarily, because I would expect that a product that is no longer meeting the target product profile, which also has safety features, then that would have to be annulled. But I'm also looking to Gavi colleagues to speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. This is Anna Osborne from Gavi. So I second your answer on the last question regarding what would happen if a product doesn't meet the TPP anymore. It would be covered by the terms of the APAs. And regarding the first question on FDA emergency use authorization, this is indeed a question to WHO. So far, the emergency use authorization has been mostly focused on WHO EUL, but I believe WHO is still, the PQ team is still looking at how to consider possibly other emergency use authorizations. Over.
Thanks. I just want to provide another comment on the question that we had before about a manufacturer that has a product that is not licensed by a stringent regulatory authority, but still able to provide vaccines. I think it would be important to encourage any manufacturer to submit an offer as soon as possible, and then the pre-qualification and other aspects will be coming down the line as a next step from a manufacturer based in a country in which the national regulatory authority is not considered stringent or is a WHO listed authority. So submit the offer, but my comments were related to the assessment. How soon will we assess those offers? And it depends on the prospects, obviously, of having that vaccine early into the market. So just to clarify, thank you.
Thank you. We'll just also address one more question still related to the regulatory authorities before we move out to the questions that are related to the countries that intend to do their procurement. So the last one on that is, should a country be in the WHO stringent authorities, regulatory authorities list, or in the WHO list of vaccine producing countries with functional NRAs? I don't know if you can answer that.
I'm not sure I understood the question.
I can repeat that.
And can I come in here?
Yes, please.
Yes, I think this is the same as what we just discussed. The question refers to functional NRS. Again, this has to go back to, of course, WHO, who will actually advise, and the independent product committee who will advise on the technicalities if the vaccine the vaccine offer candidate that we are looking at is meeting the technical specification and meeting the target product profile, and is authorized by WHO for use, regardless of the functional NRA. Over.
Thank you, Eva. Maybe these ones are to colleagues at Gavi. The questions are, which self-financing countries have indicated their intention to procure through UNICEF and PAHO? And the second question is regarding AMC countries' ability to self-procure after the 20% initial allocation, is there a timeline for them to express their intention to procure an additional 30%? Over.
Thank you, Dorcas. Regarding the self-financing countries that have indicated their intention to procure through UNICEF and PAHO, so obviously all of the PAHO member states that would be self-financing would be procuring through the PAHO revolving fund. We are currently planning engagement with self-financing countries to understand their choice of procurement channels. So we will have more visibility on that in the coming weeks. Regarding the second question, there is no timeline currently established for AMC countries that are willing to self-finance beyond the 20% allocation. There is also engagement planned with AMC countries, but fundraising efforts at least are very much focused on the 20% allocation, and all the country readiness work is also focused on ensuring distribution and delivery for this initial tranche. Over.
One last question related to that. Which AMC 92 countries have expressed their intention to procure through the facility?
So if I can answer this, Santiago Cornejo, we didn't request the AMC 92 to send us an expression of interest. So while they have, some of them have sent us expression of interest, this was not a requirement as per the self-financing country. So I wouldn't, so we have a number, but I wouldn't use that number because that was not a requirement for the AMC 92 countries. We are in conversations with all of them, and of course there is great interest from all of the AMC 92 countries in terms of understand how they can participate in the facility.
Thank you, Santiago. I don't know which one of you would like to take the question on the volumes. We do not see anything on volume commitments. Will that be tackled later? And how many volumes of vaccines do you expect to secure during each phased receipt?
We will be talking about, I will be presenting an update on numbers of countries that have already shared. And as you can even already, since the time which we prepared the slides as of today, there has been an evolution. So, but maybe I can describe a little bit more where we are in terms of the process with country later on.
Okay, thank you. Maybe then one just process clarification. Will industry have one contract with Gavi and another with UNICEF, or will there also need to be a single agreement with each country procuring through COVAX UNICEF? To date, this is still unclear.
So I can take a stab at that. I think what's clear is that it will be the advance purchase agreement with Gavi, which entertains the firm commitment and the support is required and agreed between Gavi and the manufacturer. There will be supply agreements with PAHO and with UNICEF, as we just discussed. The requirements for specific agreements by the self-financing, self-procuring countries that will not channel their demand through PAHO and UNICEF is still to be well understood. So I guess those country discussions with the self-financing and self-procuring countries will provide further visibility where such countries can issue a purchase order simply for the 3% and then for the 17%, or what their legal requirements are for embarking on this. So I think it's fair to say that this is still to be clarified, but the purpose and intent is to come up with a term sheet, as I mentioned a couple of times, which clearly sets out the basic terms and conditions to reduce also the workload to manufacturers to facilitate and support once there is allocations to self-procuring countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. I think we have a couple of questions related to procurement coordinator role. And I think the first one is, could you please clarify the role of UNICEF procurement? Could you please clarify the role of UNICEF for self-financing countries? It is mentioned that the coordinator role is to establish key basic terms with reference to which SFPs are procuring. So would you give us an example of how that would work?
Yeah, so I think this also refers to what I just mentioned, that we will establish some basic terms and conditions that the self-procuring countries will have to abide by, and that will be coming out of also your bids for your requirements, as we just talked about. And also the role of the procurement coordinator will be to reach out to the financing self-procuring countries to notify them of the allocations that will come their way, and also to monitor the drawdown on these doses across the different advanced purchase agreements with industry to ensure there's a full accountability and full transparency on these doses. So I think that's as far as we've come at the moment. You also saw on the timeline that the aim was to have those terms and conditions finalized and in place by December. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Perhaps we can take one last question before we maybe move on to the presentation from Gavi. And then we will take any more questions after the presentation from Gavi. So the last question for now is, will countries procuring through COVAX be required to accept WHO pre-qualification in lieu of their own NRA approval?
So I think that's a very good question, and we'll see what happens. I was mentioning that there will be hopefully a strong reliance on convergence and reliance on the assessments and licensure of stringent regulatory authorities to avoid to have to register vaccines in 40 or 50 countries in a very short period of time. So as always, we will expect that countries, potentially also through emergency waivers, will be able to accept products that are licensed in other countries. But as I also mentioned, we do expect there will be some countries where this will not be the case, and they will request some kind of a file to assess before they can accept importation and use of the vaccines in their country. And this has to do with the legislation in the countries. But WHO is also undertaking efforts to ensure that that will be a minimum of countries, and I also would expect that they will provide their assessment reports for other countries, as they are currently doing under the collaborative procedure for pre-qualification. So I believe everybody is fully aware of the daunting task to have vaccines licensed in many countries in a short period of time, including the potential financial requirements by such countries for fees and inspections and what have you. And there will have to be a concerted effort by all countries to reduce that as a barrier in order for them to access vaccines at a high speed. So thank you.
While you have the mic, a lot of interesting questions on this SRA approvals. So one last one before we go over to the presentation from Gavi. Do manufacturers need SRA approval in order to submit a proposal to the tender?
No, definitely not.
Thank you. So we can keep sending the questions through in the chat, but maybe now is a good time for us to move over to the next agenda point, which is the presentation from Gavi on the COVAX participation arrangements by Santiago. Over to you, Santiago.
Thank you, Dorcas. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So maybe I would try to give just a very brief overview of the COVAX participation agreements and provide you a little bit of an update where we are. Next slide, please. So just to summarize very quickly where we are in terms of the process. So there has been a very strong support for the COVAX facility since its inception. Countries have been extremely supportive, and while we have been developing at record speed in the design of this facility together with our partners, countries have not shown any kind of delays in terms of their expression of interest and support towards these efforts. By the end of August, we have over 170 countries that have expressed their interest to participate. And as I said, while we were still working on the technical design together with our partners in this call and many other partners in this effort. Since then, since we have shown or shared with countries their terms and conditions, countries had the first deadline, which was September 18, to show now to provide commitment agreements, not just share of interest, but commitment agreements to join the facility. Of course, we have heard from many countries that this was extremely challenging, given that many of those countries had to, potential participant has to not only request very unique type of approvals, but also in many cases they have to change some procedures or laws that in order for them to get this approval. It is evident that in terms of this effort of COVAX for the COVAX facility and the interest on COVID vaccines is way beyond the Ministries of Health. This has involved many other ministries in all of these countries. So what is the latest status? And this is all good, yes, you have the latest status. So as of today, we have 46 countries, participants that have sent us a legally binding commitment agreement to participate, of which 31 have requested the optional purchase arrangement and 15 the committed purchase arrangement. And I will come back to that in a little bit to describe the two. So, but in addition to this, it's very important to consider that we have support from 29 European countries in terms of the interest and support towards the facility. And therefore, we can talk about that we have over 75 support from over 75 countries in terms of the self-financing. In addition, we need to, this does not include, as I mentioned before, the 92 countries, the participants that will be subsidized with the AMC instrument, which is it's an instrument to mobilize ODA to subsidize the vaccines. So in total, what we have so far is around 167 countries that will be potentially receiving vaccines through this facility. As I mentioned before, this is still work in progress. We know many participants, future participants, are communicating with us that they are finalizing the last legal steps in order to sign and to send us the agreement. So we do expect this number to increase more in the coming days. And we are being flexible to these countries, again, given that they have shown the interest from the beginning. They are, and it's just a matter of internal steps and bureaucracies in order to get all the legal steps and financial steps to join the facility. In terms of the next deadline, what we will have is October 9th, and that's when countries need to, these countries that have sent us that have signed an agreement to start providing a financial commitment in terms of a upfront payment and or a financial guarantee. Now, In terms of the demand, we don't have yet the numbers because, as you can see, this has been an evolving situation, and as I mentioned, we do expect more countries to sign in the coming days. In fact, since we prepared this presentation, I think the version we had on Friday had 43, now it's 46. So we didn't want to share numbers that then will be obsolete or not updated 1 hour after you receive them. So, but however, after the deadline, we will be able to provide an update on what will be the final number in terms of doses or in terms of demand, the demand for in the facility. Our current target is, as it was mentioned by Anne, is to continue to work towards the 2 billion doses in terms of output of the facility for 2021. Next slide. So what I would go and provide a little bit of a description is on these two arrangements. As I said, this is only for self-financing countries. What I'm going to be talking about is in terms of self-financing countries. For the countries, the MC92, which, let me just quick reminder, the MC92 are those countries that they are either low or lower middle income country plus 12 IDA eligible countries. This will be receiving, since they will be receiving subsidy through this financial instrument called the AMC, then though for these countries, they have a different process to provide, to request the support. And that also some of the elements and the characteristics are being reviewed by our board in tomorrow and the day after. But for the self-financing countries, these are countries that they will be financing from their own resources, their participation. They could participate under two types of arrangements. One is what we call the optional purchase arrangement. And what this implies is a higher upfront payment, but then the participant will have the option to decide on purchasing the doses from the different candidates. And then there is only a request for a small, what we call risk sharing guarantee.
So I see that at least from the input from a manufacturing side, certainly the options too should be looked at from a lens of the overall impact of the manufacturing process, correct?
Sorry, all the options in this slide or from manufacturing function?
Can you please mute your phone?
Yeah, I guess your comment is directed towards ensuring that we assess these different options against the impact of manufacturing in terms.
Hector, your mic is open.
Sorry, let me then continue. And then happy to answer some of those questions on the different arrangements. Then the other arrangement is committed purchase arrangement. And this is what it requires in terms of the participant. The participant will provide a lower down payment or upfront payment, but then, however, what they will need to provide is a financial commitment and guarantee to purchase the number of doses that they have committed. Very important is that irrespective of the arrangement, either optional or committed, in both arrangements, at the time of purchase of the doses, the countries will pay the price agreed between the facility and the manufacturer. So the price, therefore, does not change it in between the two arrangements. Next slide. So if we provide a little bit more detail between the two, so very important is in terms of the access to the broad diversified portfolio of vaccine candidates. Basically, both arrangements provide the same access. It's not that one arrangement will have certain vaccines that the others will not. So both in terms of access provide the same access. Also, in terms of participation into the governance process of the COVAX facility, in order to provide full transparency, both have the same, participants in both arrangements will have the same level of participation. And as I mentioned before, in terms of the prices, since the prices will be basically the same for both arrangements, so it's not that we will be, the facility itself will be providing or including some kind of price differentiation. So the facility is only what we call a pass-through. So we are not planning to introduce any kind of price, either subsidies or or price increments to the ones to the price agreed between the facility and the manufacturer in the APC's APA. So this will not be, so therefore there will be the same price. In terms of flexibility to switch or trade doses through the COVAX exchange, this both, again, participants in both type of arrangements, they could participate that. This is something, the COVAX exchange is a mechanism that is in development. We still need to develop, but the idea of this mechanism is that participants, countries will be able to trade or switch or exchange basically rights to a number of share of doses to other participants. And as I said, it's still work in progress in order to ensure that it's done in a simple way, but also to ensure that in terms of the timelines, it does are aligned and will not create delays in terms of shipment and delivery of vaccines. Now, so as I said, in terms of all those characteristics before, there's no difference between the optional purchase arrangement and the committed. Where we start seeing some difference are in the following characteristics. One is in terms of the upfront payment. As I mentioned, in terms of the committed purchase, it requires a lower upfront payment and with less funding at risk. So that is for the committed. However, for the optional purchase, in terms of financial guarantees, it does provide a lower financial guarantee. So this is, of course, the difference between in terms of the financial structure between the two. So there is a difference in that. And then in terms of ability to opt out of certain deals, basically there is an ability for the optional purchase countries to decide on certain candidates. So this is something that I will come in a little bit to describe this process, but basically countries will have the ability to decide on the candidates. While in the committed, they don't, except for one only option, which is basically the countries in the committed purchase can't opt out to purchase a candidate if it's higher than the price that has been ceiling that has been set up. So this is the only difference that you have. As you can see in terms of for the optional one, we have not introduced the issue of price, and the only reason is not because price is not, it's just purely because in the optional, basically, participants can select, we have the option in every candidate of the portfolio. So let me walk through then a little bit the process of these options and when will participants be making those decisions. So if we go to the next slide. So in this slide, so basically here what you have is, this is the case of the committed purchase. So in the committed purchase, so basically the participants will need to inform the COVAX facility when they sign with the COVAX facility if they don't want to procure doses that will cost more than twice the estimated weighted average price. So basically this will have to be done at the time of signing their participation to the facility, which is right now. So at this moment, those with the committed, they will have to highlight if they want this to be applied to them. And in that case, then the doses for those countries that decides on this, they will not be included in the deal. So as you can see in this graph, this is significantly before we sign the deals with the manufacturers. So we will know this information in advance and include it in our deal making. And then of course, then if it's before the deal, and then in terms of the next steps, as those are procured, then of course there will be the regulatory approval as it was described before, and then the procurement. If we get to the next slide, which is when countries joining with the optional approach, basically here the countries will have 2 windows to decide on different candidates. One is that the first window will be before the COVAX facility signs a deal with the manufacturer. So this first window, basically, countries or participants under the option arrangements will have the opportunity to decide if they want to participate in that deal. So if the country decides that they are not going to participate in that deal, therefore their doses, their financing will not be included in that deal. So there will be no risk either to the facility, to the country, or to the manufacturer, because those countries will not be included. Similar to the countries that decided to opt out because of price in the committed approach. Now, if the country decides that they want to participate in that first window, then there will be, and it will be under the option with the options. Then there will be a second window to execute those options, and that second window basically will be aligned to the time when the facility will have to execute options in the agreement with the manufacturer. So before the facility will execute options for doses under the deal with the manufacturer, we will go back to the countries that has those options, and we will ask them if they're still interested in executing those options. If they are not, then of course, then there will be no commitment for countries, for these participants to exercise these options. So this is a little bit when the country will have to decide. And of course, then we will, as a facility, then we will have that information to make the decision about executing the options or not into that agreement with manufacturers. So, and as you can see, these are the 2 windows that where countries will be exercising these options. So these windows will be aligned with the timelines of the specific candidates and the deals that will be conducted by the facility. So it will not be the set in terms of, if we can call it the calendar timelines, but it will be specifics before signing a deal, and then when during the time that in those deals, those options will be executed. Next slide. So in terms of the next steps, I just wanted to come back, and before we open to questions, to summarize that, as I mentioned, we are receiving very strong commitment towards the facility. This facility will be the largest multilateral initiative since, I think, the Paris Climate Agreement, since we expect over 160 countries that will be, or closer to, over 170 countries that will be signing into the facility. But as I said, we're still for some of these countries that they're still going through some internal processes in terms of approvals. They will, their agreements should be coming in the coming days. And the very important deadline that we have upcoming, it's the 9th of October. Given that this is when we expect financial commitments in terms of from all the different participants, either some will have to provide, countries will need to provide their upfront payment, and then of course some will have to also be providing some of the financial guarantees. And after that, then we will have not only agreements in terms of for the demand, but also the financial backing for the demand that countries will be requesting. So let me perhaps stop here and ask for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Santiago. Pardon me. Since you have the mic, let me just start with one question in the chat that is saying, could you elaborate on the role of EU countries since the EU is progressing multiple bilateral agreements at present?
Yes, so probably you have seen in the news that the EC has shown extremely support. Also, we have support from individual EU members that have sent agreements. Now, just to be very important that for any countries having a bilateral agreement is not a barrier for participation in the COVAX mechanism. So countries that have bilateral agreements will still, if they decide and they would like to join, they can still join the COVAX facility. So this is not a barrier for participation, nor a limitation in terms of their rights or contributions towards the COVAX facility. So all countries have the same, if you want to say, rights, and also in terms of contributions, depending if the only difference that we make is if they are either AMC countries, that then they will be subsidized, or self-financing countries. But in terms of bilateral agreements, this is not a barrier for participation into the COVAX mechanism.
Thank you very much. Maybe we'll just take two questions together. And the first one is that in the optional purchase agreement, do you count countries? In the optional procurement purchase agreement, do you count countries have full decision rights over vaccine selection? And the other one is around, will the 92 countries have to make commitment payment to Gavi? If so, what percentage? Linda and Barbara, I'll come to your questions as well.
Yes, so just maybe, Douglas, I will ask you to repeat the second question. Let me start with the first one. In terms of, do they have the full decision rights over vaccine selection? Basically, what the countries within the optional purchase arrangement, what they will, for each of the deals that we will be allocating a pro rata share for them, then they will have the ability to say if they want to participate or not in that deal. Of course, if they decline every deal except one manufacturer, then they will be enough with one manufacturer. However, it's very important that countries that they opt out to certain deals, then it will have implication in terms of the timeliness, in terms of when we will be able to satisfy then their full demand. Because of course, as they say no to the candidates that they have been allocated originally, then those demand, then of course we will satisfy them, but it will have to be later on, will have to be based, adjusted based on the availability of supply to the manufacturers that they decide that they would like to participate. So the answer is, therefore, yes, they have ability to decide on each of the candidates if they want to participate or not, but it doesn't mean for them that they will have automatic access to a single manufacturer if that's their decision in the early timelines. I think that will only be subject of availability of supply and demand for those specific manufacturers, because of course we also need to balance this with our principles of equity and fair access to vaccines. And sorry, the second was, what was the amount for the upfront payment? Is that the question? Yeah.
Will 92 countries have to make a commitment payment to Gavi? If yes, what percentage?
Sorry, the 92, yeah. So the 92 countries, at the moment, we're not looking for, first, this is a decision that our Gavi board will decide, I think it's Wednesday. So in terms of, so we will have. Now, the way it has been presented is that the Gavi, as many of you might know, has a mandatory co-financing policy. However, we believe that in the current stage of this pandemic, and in order to have a rapid introduction, which is the main goal of the facility, then financing should not be a barrier for these countries. Therefore, we will not be asking a mandatory co-financing for countries as per the regular Gavi co-financing, for those that are aware. What we will be asking is a cost share. So because we have heard that many countries, in terms of solidarity, in terms of ownership, they want to contribute, We are in conversations with the multilateral development banks that also can provide resources on their behalf. So we will be making that option for the board to decide if this is something that it should be introduced. But as I said, this is a decision that yet I cannot tell, because the board will make a decision on Wednesday. But even if there is a contribution, the contribution from these MC 92 countries will be a co-share and not our standard type of co-financing. Now, long term, if these vaccines is routinized, and this is still to be decided, then of course in the medium to long term, then we will be looking if this is a normal vaccine in terms of the portfolio of Gavi, of course, to include some kind of co-financing mechanism.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of interesting questions, but maybe can I just swing over to UNICEF and PAHO? There's a question around how will COVAX UNICEF prioritize delivery to participating countries in the context of constrained supply?
Yeah, maybe I can go first. I think the whole point is that the WHO allocation mechanism will inform us where the doses should go as they become available. So luckily, I believe that we are not the ones having to choose between which of our countries, or which of the countries that we are supplying, that we will have to supply first. So we'll be looking to WHO to provide that guidance to us.
Thank you, Anne.
And Dorcas, just to add to that, so many of the WHO regional offices have extensive experience over the years, and Dr. Jarvis referred to this earlier with the pandemic influenza response, on working very closely with countries based on the WHO allocation process that Anne mentioned in expediting deliveries to countries. So we'll be working in tandem with WHO and with UNICEF here in this region to make sure that our countries receive those doses. Over.
Thank you, John. So maybe while you have the mic, another question is, could you also please give us an update on country readiness index that is going on and the criteria being considered? And will there be an opportunity for manufacturers to contribute?
Right, so our regional immunization program is working closely with WHO headquarters, UNICEF headquarters in New York, in preparing countries globally and in particular in this region on readiness from the point of view of cold chain readiness, from the point of view of demand forecasts, updates, and all other aspects related to the successful introduction of this vaccine. Over.
Thank you. Do colleagues at UNICEF want to add anything, or shall I move on to the next question?
Dorcas?
Yes, Eva?
Yeah, Eva here. Maybe I just for participants online to clarify with regards to the allocation mechanism and decision making. It's important for everyone to know that there is going to be a joint allocation task force that actually is going to prepare for, vaccine allocation decision. And this is going to then to be validated by the independent allocation validation group. And once this is done, then the COVAX facility will then take action to implement those decisions. So immediately upon such decision, Gavi and UNICEF and PAHO will actually implement in terms of taking the doses to the countries. So those committees are going to look at all the details, including, the country readiness and prioritization of countries based on the allocation framework. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. And I think staying with the topic of allocation, the next question is, once a country is allocated a specific vaccine for the initial 3%, will they get the same vaccine for the remaining 17%? Over. PAHO, UNICEF, I don't know whether that's something that would...
Yeah, I can come in, Dorcas. I mean, of course, is ideally that's what we would like to do. Of course, this is for the allocation committee. Ideally, we would like to have the same vaccine going to country, but let's also understand that we are operating on a supply constraint, so we might not have necessarily that ideal world when it comes to the allocation post 3%. So yes, I mean, ideally that will be what everyone wants to do to make it simpler and easier for countries. And we know that countries' preference normally is to stay within the same. But again, you know, that all depends on what is available. Over.
So, sorry, if I can also add to what I mentioned, because this is very important. As I mentioned, I think ideally we would like that scenario, but also we don't yet know what is the characteristics of the successful vaccines. If we have more than one, would one vaccine be more efficacious with certain groups vis-a-vis another type of vaccines? Would some vaccines be easier to implement in terms of a programmatic in urban settings rather than rural? So there are many different elements that we also will have to look at once we start knowing if we have more than one successful vaccine in terms of the impact, effectiveness, and of course that will, that as Eva mentioned, which is very important, that group that will be looking at allocation, which is an independent group that is based on following WHO framework and guidelines, then they will be making some of those recommendations.
Thank you. One question about reporting on supply. So will manufacturers need to perform on a regular basis? I believe, and this is related to the comment on the work under the Procurement Coordinator. Can you provide some more context and to whom manufacturers would be need to submit this information?
Yeah, so I think the specific details of the reporting requirements are being fleshed out as we speak, but obviously what will be important to monitor the use and availability of supply under the advanced purchase agreements to ensure that the facility meets its commitments and reaps the full benefits of the investments made. Then this will need to be closely monitored, the use of the doses, and I would expect that the volumes that have been delivered, perhaps to which country, by when, would need to be reported on. But the systems are yet to be established for that reporting. And UNICEF, as I mentioned, will be undertaking the Procurement Coordinator role to ensure that there is full visibility on those aspects. So I think that's as far as I can go now. If anyone else has additional information, please share. Thanks.
Thank you. So being mindful of time, and I'm just wondering if Oleg and Edouard and anybody who has questions around NRAs and SRAs, maybe what we can undertake to do is pull together all the questions that have been put together and in consultation with WHO come up with a comprehensive response and include in there any focal points or contacts if there are further questions. So that way we make sure that this very important question around approvals and NRAs and SRAs is covered adequately. Yeah, thank you, Oleg. So being mindful of time, I was thinking that maybe we could move on to the closing remarks, and if we could start with you colleagues at PAHO before we pass over to UNICEF, if that's okay.
Dr. Jarvis.
No, thank you. I think that it's many questions that have been raised that are part of the discussion. I think that it's very important also to highlight the regulatory strategies that will be adopted. I think that it was mentioned properly that the pre-qualification team in Geneva is working with the national health regulatory authorities to have an expedited process, but at the same time to review very carefully all the dossiers and to guarantee that the vaccines are safe and available. I think that a very important overview about all the partially options that the countries are adopting, and also a very important commitment from more than 150 countries, if I understood correctly, nowadays already in COVAX. And we are expecting more countries from our region in the Americas to be joining the COVAX these days. So I think that it's very important to keep this communication open. Many questions, we are still working on them, but in a couple of days or weeks, we will have more information to share in order to have a very good outcome for this tremendous effort to guarantee equitable access to the countries for COVID-19 vaccine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any closing remarks from UNICEF side?
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you, Dr. Jarbas. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to the teams that have presented from Gavi, PAHO, and UNICEF. Really, thank you so much, and thank you for the participants, rich questions. I think, as you see, we are building the ship as we sail, so there is a lot of those questions that we are trying to address, and there is still a lot, that remains. I think some clarity, I hope we did provide some clarity. I'm aware that there is still remaining, and I take note that there is need for further clarification with regards to regulatory, to the self-financing, to the country's participation, and to the role of UNICEF as coordinator. A lot of questions with regards to the demand as well from countries being beyond. So really rich questions. What we are going to do is that we will develop a Q&A and share all what we shared with you today, but also take some of those that we were not able to address today to the next, make those available to you. Also, I know some of you here have been working with UNICEF and PAHO maybe in decades, and there are some manufacturers which is the first time of interacting with us. So it is very important that we address your many questions that maybe you're not even able to put in the chat box or to raise your hand. So please do reach out to us. We had tried, and started to do an onboarding of the new manufacturers with whom, we haven't been engaging before, and the team is available to support for you to understand, but also keep in mind that your questions are helping us to recalibrate our strategy and make sure that the tender is right and is addressing your concern. So it will just help us refine and do a better job. So we really look forward to you coming back with more questions to us, and we can come back to you with more answers, hopefully in the coming weeks. So with that, thank you so much to everyone. Over to you, Dorcas.
Eva, just before we close, we just want to make a little reminder on the event tomorrow, on the announcement for the meeting on the traceability. So we will be sharing also the contact details for participation in that meeting tomorrow at 2 o'clock. So thank you very much.
Yeah, very good point, Anne, and thanks for highlighting that. Actually, we really look forward to your expertise on that. This is also important for us to ensure that you use crisis to improve traceability, especially during crisis is sometimes an opportunity. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there was one question around where we can post additional questions, and we have shared our email addresses, so you can contact either of us here at UNICEF or PAHO, and we will take the conversation further. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time, and we look forward to a continued good engagement on this. Over.